which would include turning on a recording. And I know there's a bunch of folks in the room. Glad to see that. What I'm normally we would do a some kind of introduction of everyone, but I think if we did that, we would kind of eat up most of a good chunk of our time. So maybe if folks just for the to make that more efficient, if you want to enter your introductions with a little bit of your affiliation in the chat while this is going on, or guest speakers can get some context, and then I presume if there's follow-up afterwards, there'll be opportunities to make those connections. So
good idea.
yeah. Okay. So with that, I'll just restate a little bit here. Just my name's Josh Metz, and I'm the a senior advisor with Regional Government Services, and we are happy to be here on today's session focused on the topic of, I would call it, rural-oriented venture capital, as distinguished a little bit from the metro centers, and what some of the opportunities and challenges there are. And we've got a couple of few great guest speakers, and they will all have a chance to represent where they're coming from, and talk a little bit about how they approach the topic. And I think, just from the experience many of us had in Sacramento earlier last year, it's at the California Economic Summit, and some of the things that happened there, just maybe including some comments about what you as venture investors look for in determining how to looking for investable companies and things like that, I think would be quite useful. And then normally what we do is about let's see, about 15-20 minute kind of talking by the presenters, and then 5-10 minute of discussion with a little wiggle room in there. And generally casual conversational. Sometimes people get excited and want to raise their hand in the middle of it. But just, we tend to be pretty orderly and understand our time constraints. So that's what I would set up for the context. Susan, do you have anything else you want to add?
No, let's go.
Okay.
Let's go, girl.
Since we didn't draw straws, but I'd say, giving a little bit to the hometown representatives, I would first hand it to John and Dan from Lost Coast Ventures to hold forth a little bit on where they're coming from, and then kind of go as we did in the warm up through the speakers. So John and Dan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Josh. And speaking on behalf of Lost Coast Ventures, I tell all of you that we're really happy to be here. I do know some of you. I've met some of you in our travels through Humboldt County over the last couple of years. I know Dan knows a number of you as well. We'd love to know all of you, and we invite you to reach out and connect with us. We're actually up in Humboldt County quite often. I live in Santa Cruz. I try and spend at least 1 week a month up there in Humboldt. And Dan often is there at least that much, and sometimes more. So we have a presence up there. It's not full time. We're going to tell you a little bit about what we've been doing. We'll talk a little bit about investment criteria and some real exciting news, which I'm sure some of you know about, the co-working space that's opening in Arcata called Startup Humboldt, which we're a part of making happen too. And we'll talk about that and what it means going forward. I'm going to go ahead and share a presentation with you, and let's see. Just 1 second. Okay. And you should be able to see that now. Can you see
Yes.
that?
Yes.
Okay, great. And our website address is down there at the bottom of the splash screen. It is being updated and refreshed, so there'll be new content there shortly. Start with talking about, excuse me, a little bit about our backgrounds. And Dan, why don't you start? You're the local guy. You start, and I'll pick it up on the end.
Sure, sure. First thing I got to fix is, my name. So it has two L's. And I'm the CTO, so you would think, I could handle those, but literally, we're moving it over to a different platform so we can refresh. And we were going through that this last week, as all of you know, the fun of that. And so I was literally trying to fix DNS server stuff this morning, while doing a day job. Anyway, enough about that. Yes, I bleed Humboldt and North Coast blood, grew up there through high school, grew up in the mountains through high school, through College of the Redwoods, took the meandering path, but went to Humboldt and got 2 undergraduate degrees there, and partnered with one of my professors, Jim Blaisdell, did research work at NASA Ames at the time, and published some papers and what have you. But we started a software company coming out of that. And, I always bring that up because, I know what it was like bringing or starting bootstrapping a company up on the North Coast, and what we went through, what was available and what wasn't available, and certainly the challenges of that. Just a little bit more on my background. Like John, I now live down in the Bay Area in Los Gatos, but up there often. My parents, my aunts, uncles are all still in the area, and I've been certainly engaged with the university. I chair the Boldly Rising campaign, where we, against a goal of 25 million, raised almost 60 million, which was a good step forward. I co-chair President Flamer's his president's council at College of the Redwoods. So involved in that, and then really involved in a lot of sports programs and helping on a number of fronts. So just my background and a couple of things. I'm a technology guy. So had startups, took 2 companies public, took an international company, sold it over. My last few gigs was TiVo, if you remember the DVR. It was a really cool technology back in its time. And so I was the head of engineering, then a COO of that company. And then I was the CTO of Hulu. So scaled and grew that from 15 million subscribers to over 40 million, started a live service and did a lot around that. And then, I've been involved in this. I'm been involved, and I'm going to be stepping away and putting more time into this effort here. We're actually announcing that tomorrow, but I've been CTO of a Group Chamberlain, a Blackstone company. So I came in for a couple of years, helping them turn a manufacturing company into a tech play. And so been involved in that. And so, yeah, that's a little bit of my background. John?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Yeah, Dan and I are about the same age. I graduated from Humboldt in 1980, went to grad school in Colorado, and actually worked in higher education for about 6 years before moving back to the Silicon Valley where I grew up, and took a job in a public company that was struggling, and ended up staying with that company throughout my career, and eventually leading that company as first CFO and then later CEO. I sold that company in 2001 to a Fortune 500 company called SPX Corporation, and I stayed with them for 21 more years, working with 8 different global businesses for them. and had quite a run doing a lot of different things and a lot of different businesses, including growing them, buying businesses, selling businesses, and came out with had a great career and came out with a really good set of skills that I love sharing with people when I'm given the opportunity to do so. Dan and I first met on the Boldly Rising campaign. Dan was the chairperson, and he asked me to join the leadership team, and I did. And we both shared this view about wanting to do something more for the institution. And this is not a novel or new idea. It's a nonprofit. It's been done a number of places around the country, but it's modeled after something my father did for Dartmouth College. He formed an entity called Angeli Parvey and deployed only about $1.5 million in a series of investments, 50, 100, 200K at a time. And that over 20 years ended up returning $20 million to the institution. Now Dartmouth's different than Humboldt. They have a medical school, they have a business school, and there are different challenges at Humboldt. But it's an interesting model that Dan and I both saw as being something really interesting that we could work on together for a 10-year period. We're in the beginnings of year 3 in that process, and still firmly committed to pursuing what we're trying to do. Let me just talk a little bit about what we're doing here. Everybody asks us, what do we have to do to get money from you? And it's a difficult question because we actually end up talking to lots of people. They could be students, they could be faculty, staff members, they have to have some kind of connection to the institution, either CR or Humboldt. And the reason for that is that our whole premise of our nonprofit is set up to benefit as a supporting organization those two institutions. So we spend our time and we'll invest our money and others' money into ventures that come out of or are related to these institutions. Now, we started suggesting that those connections had to be really, really direct. We are certainly willing to listen to arguments that there's a connection there. We're really interested in seeing more deal flow. In what we've done over the last 2 years, you can see we've done a lot of mentoring. That's defined as different engagements that we have with interested parties that come to know about us. And these are usually multiple sets of meetings, learning about their business and trying to help them where we can. And even when we can't fund a business, we're interested in helping them on that journey towards entrepreneurship. And in the last 2.5 years, we've had what we call 30 different engagements with different entities who have approached us with some interest in getting funding. To date, we haven't funded any of them. And the principal reason for that is that we have some investment criteria that require them to be generally scalable, and they need to be able to generate good paying jobs on the North Coast. A lot of what we're seeing up there at Humboldt, and it doesn't mean it's the only thing that's there, but it's what we've seen so far, are small, discrete, sole proprietor kinds of ideas that people come up with, and they don't check the box in terms of scaling or growth for us. Again, we'll work with the individuals, we'll partner with them, and we stay in touch with them. And I'm pleased to say that they reach out quite often for more advice. So it's been both rewarding and interesting, but somewhat challenging too. In addition to being scalable, you'll see down there that we need to see the ability to create high quality jobs on the North Coast. There is a shortfall of those jobs. There's many people looking for work up there, and we need to be more focused on finding business opportunities to create employment opportunities. And then lastly, and many of you will resonate to this, it's awfully hard to run a business without good quality people. And it's even harder to start one without good quality people. So there's a number of soft skill sets and the right and wrong things that we try and sort through with founders to know if they're really up to what's required to start a business. And I'm pleased to say that has not been the reason that we've opted not to fund things. We've seen good quality people up there at Humboldt. It's really largely been around the lack of scalable opportunities. You can see down there in terms of objectives that we really want to find 5 different entities and invest in them by 2027. And through those 5 and more, we are committed over the 10-year run that we've got going to adding 250 good quality jobs up in Humboldt County. Those are going to be aggressive. They are aggressive, and I know that we're going to be challenged to get those funded opportunities through the pipeline and in place by 2027. But we are working on a couple right now that show promise, and more to come on that as they begin to develop. And then lastly, we're hoping that our investments in these businesses eventually return something to the institutions. And we have an objective by 2032 to return at least $5 million in equity to Humboldt and CR through these investments that we're making. So that's what we're trying to do. We are also very interested in partnering with anybody and everybody up in Humboldt. And one of the things that I've seen is that there are a lot of people working on these kind of issues from different angles. And I think the more the merrier, and the more we can cooperate and share, the better off the region's going to be in the end. I'm also going to just briefly touch on something that's quite exciting for us. And that is we're a founding member of Startup Humboldt, which is co-working space in Arcata on 7th Street. It's the old Internews space that has, this summer we took possession of that space, and it has been completely renovated inside. And I think there's paint on the outside. Last time I was up there, no sign yet, but we actually have people in the building. The SBDC folks, both the regional and local folks, are housed in that building. And I think they're quite happy with the space. This was made possible through the work of everybody on this page. And Casey Flynn at Cal Poly Humboldt was really a force in making this happen. And there were a number of obstacles to taking over the lease and getting the building modified so that it suits its purpose here. But if you can imagine a 7,700 square foot building that has perimeter offices, and the entire inside of the building is open with furniture on wheels, it allows us to open the facility and rent co-working space that's shared by tenants, the founding tenants there too on this page, and host events, large events that will seat upwards of 100 people in the facility, and perhaps even conferences during off hours and weekends. So it's a flexible space. We're going to try and make it affordable and accessible to all. And we will have a grand opening in late March, with the date being announced hopefully later this week. We're just trying to get a few things cleaned up about the business, the building, and I'm super excited to invite you all in there and see what's going on. I'm sure you've heard a bit about it through SBDC or one of the other founding partners. With that, here's a picture of what the Internews space looks like before it was modified. It's more of a tan color on the outside. And again, if you've been in the Internews space, you won't really recognize the new space inside. It's completely different, and I think very suitable for the purposes intended. So with that, I'd like to open it up for any questions, and Dan and I'd be happy to address any questions that you might have.
Yeah, this is a big step for the North Coast, having both the venture fund and this facility there. So yeah, one of the things, and folks, feel free to raise your hand if you do have questions or comments to add. But just the idea of, one of the things that we deal a lot with on the public side is grants and grant programs. And so the idea of clicking over into a business and revenue generating, profit generating business model is a bit of a thing, a mind shift to go through. I think from what, my experience in working in this world of economic development, I mean, the work of entrepreneurship development is really core to getting people there who may not already be there, supporting, giving people the skills and courage to get through. So, uh, it's great to have this facility and the program around that. Susan, you're first, and then Marianne and Amanda.
I'll be curious if Marianne's going to touch on the same topic as me, because we have had discussions before about this resistance to scalability for people who are starting business in Humboldt. And kind of the whole culture of building businesses came from Humboldt. Folks came here, they wanted to stay, they couldn't find a job, they created their own job, and that was their goal, was to stay in Humboldt, enjoy being here. And then when the thought of scalability comes in, they're like, then I'll be working too much. I just want to be able to do what I'm doing. So I have a couple of questions. One of them is, how can we start having that conversation with business owners from the beginning about the proper way to scale up, thinking big? What does that mean for you? And then the second question is, what year do you think people might start thinking about expanding, especially if they're gonna, Marianne and I were specifically talking about maybe a business in Mendocino that's doing really well, opening one in Humboldt or somewhere else. Is there a time that's good to reach out to businesses to try to talk about that?
Dan, you want to take a stab at that?
Sure. It's interesting that you say that, and there seems to be some resistance. In our endeavor, we've seen, we had, the fact we haven't funded, even the thinking or thought process around building or scaling outside of Humboldt, or whatever scaling means. It's just not there. It's just not in the DNA, where you go to other locations, certainly in the Silicon Valley, and all starts there. And I think, there's a couple of things that are important. For whatever reasons, if work-life balance is your thing, then it's probably not as much a aggressive entrepreneurial thing. But some resistance is, just to be in, big business or what have you. And listen, the way some of the biggest problems in the world are going to be solved, whatever it is through commercial means, taking really profound research and turning it in commercial and expanding from there. And so whatever the drivers are, there can be good logic and reasons to do that. And so I do think part of our effort is to broaden the thinking about how people approach different ideas and different businesses. And then we're targeting, we're part of an ecosystem that supports all kinds of businesses, and we're very focused on funding and leaning into the ideas that just have that need for support, seed capital that can go on to other types of raising capital, and growing entrepreneurial ideas with scale. I think the broader ecosystem can support all kinds of different businesses and different approaches from that. I'm trying to think of your second question, or John, did you have any?
Yeah, the second question was along timing of
Yeah.
scale, right? And I think that's highly variable. Some people walk into an opportunity and instantly they want to scale whatever they're doing. or they see the potential. We're working with a client right now who's had a business in Fortuna for years, and I won't say that suddenly he woke up and said he wanted to grow it, but it is very sudden, and he's very interested in growth. So I don't think there's a one size fit all answer for that question. I think you've got to be open to it. And Dan and I are not here to say either that even if you're talking to somebody who doesn't want to scale a business, that's okay. I mean, it's the county needs every seat of employment they can find, and growing a business, starting a business, that's admirable in any case. Mary Ann.
Hi there. Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much. This is a very interesting conversation, near and dear to my heart. First question is, you referenced all the work that you're doing in Humboldt. What about some other counties? Are you interested in your 5 that you're trying to fulfill by a certain period of time coming from some other counties besides Humboldt, or are you only looking for businesses in Humboldt?
I'll say one thing. We try to adjust our nomenclature to say North Coast.
Okay.
So have a broader context. So we're really focusing on the North Coast. So that certainly includes, Del Norte and even down in Mendocino.
And Susan is, right. There is a lack of a lot of people who really understand what it takes to scale up a business and how to go into a business thinking larger than our region. I have 2 in mind that have the potential. One of them has already gone large and sold and now is working on a second. He was the one that developed the electric tractor here in Albion, in Mendocino, and then sold it to an international company. And then we have another person who's doing who's early stage, and again it goes back to that training, right? He has the contract and he has the patent for this unique kind of concrete, but he doesn't have the knowledge of how to scale something in that way. And I was trying to connect him with a lot of our state representatives who gave him the advice of going overseas and doing the work because the permitting process was easier, which I thought was a little bit odd, but our state representatives were sending him away, but that's what was the recommendation. But I think it has potential. We are like we are an SBDC in Mendocino County as well as a women's business center, and we see businesses all the time like this, which are moving along. They're happy where they are. They're not looking to really grow, and then every now and then 1 or 2 pop up that have this huge potential, and either they lack the resources and the knowledge, or our environment, our whole region doesn't have what it takes to get them to that next level. So those are 2 things. And then the last thing I wanted to just say too is, have we been thinking about bringing people from other parts of California to come up here where there is space to do some things? And I bring this up, and Josh will know why I'm bringing this up, because when they had the learning symposium on the blue economy up here, one of the things that we heard is that San Diego is so overcrowded right now for the kind of work in marine sciences. They came up to North Coast and they were like, wow, there's all this land, but we don't have the infrastructure in place so that they can do it, like a seawater intake or some of these other things. But they were very, very interested because there's just frankly no more space in Southern California to do that type of work. So rather than homegrown, can we bring somebody up here who could do that? So.
You should be careful what you wish for. I was riding on a chairlift a week ago, and there was this woman from Aspen, and we exchanged pleasantries about where we were from. And she says, "Oh, I've heard all about Eureka and Arcata. It's all over the papers in Aspen. It's the next place everybody wants to move to." So we have a housing problem up there, and it's not so easy a set of issues to solve for. But there are businesses that would like to relocate up there, and that could happen. And we'd love to help make that happen if any of you happen to run into somebody who's interested in making that move.
You brought up an interesting point I was just listening to, and John and I have found whenever you talk to a, business owner, or, inventor or whatever, often they know their specific product, but there's so much to scale in a business, and that's some of the guidance that we hope to provide, whether it's, financial modeling or understanding that size, or the go-to-market strategies, or evaluating market opportunities, or or connecting them with other expertise that can help assess an opportunity, and those kinds of resources as you're early on and trying to figure out, because a proprietor or a young group will have, starting up, doesn't have that breadth, and so I think collectively all of us can help
Yeah.
those organizations.
Yeah, those are, I mean, I think you'll find that this group in particular is well aligned with that mission. And I think, having this introduction here is really a great step. Obviously, a lot of these folks, but I'm sure you'll get to know, if you haven't already gotten to know, Greg Foster, because he's going to be talking all about. He's very enthusiastic and knowledgeable, especially about the airport business park, which indeed is a big opportunity up there.
Blowhard. The guy's a blowhard. Don't get him started, Josh.
So, yeah. Yeah, so look, I just want to keep us moving because I know the other two presenters have lots to share, and I want to make sure they have enough time to do that. But look, this is just introduction. There will be the material shared will be available, and certainly the connections afterwards to the speakers. So I think what we did was, yeah, Jay, you're next, and just keep track of the timing so we make sure that Danny doesn't get cut short at the end, because he's got some good stuff to share too. Thank you for joining us, Jay, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Josh. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
we can see it. There you go.
So my parent organization is called the Center on Rural Innovation, CORI for short. And CORI is trying to solve this problem. So basically there's and this is not news to you all, but a very significant economic gap that has developed between rural areas and metro areas in the United States. This graph is starting from the 2008 recession. There was a large period of offshoring and automation that occurred at that time that impacted the whole country. Metro recovered and then some, and rural has not. So that is really CORI's reason for being, is to try to close this rural versus metro gap in the US. In digging into that problem, one of the biggest drivers is tech economy. So if you look at the share of the workforce in rural, it's about 12%, but tech jobs is only about 5%. So there's this huge discrepancy in sort of the tech economy. And if you track at what has really driven job growth in metro areas, it's it is a high degree of that tech growth and tech jobs that have provided the engine that's brought them back and then some from some of the downturns. So we are all about trying to create scalable tech opportunities in small towns. So that is CORI's mission, a new area of prosperity for rural America in the age of innovation. And we're trying to create opportunities that empower rural people to thrive in the tech economy. So one of the other, and let me talk about CORI overall a little bit. So the CORI as an organization basically tries to catalyze that startup ecosystem in small towns by partnering with local communities. So there are 40 communities that are part of Corey's Rural Innovation Network. And that stretches from Independence, Oregon, which is the furthest west, to Waterville, Maine, which is the furthest east. And each one of those towns typically has an effort centered around like a physical space, similar to the startup co-working space that Dan and John have put together. And it's usually led by either economic development authority or a university or an entrepreneur in the region that wants to see this type of work expand. And one of the other missing ingredients tends to be access to capital, which is where my effort comes in. So if you look at venture capital in the United States, it is hugely disproportionately invested into metro areas. So rural counties are about 15% of the US population, and they get less than 2% of the venture capital in the United States. VC has been a huge growth engine for the economy that just has not been available in rural areas. And we are trying to shift that dynamic. So what, our small effort is not going to change those percentages, but we're trying to advocate for that change in many communities to have them develop their own sources of capital. But let me just give you an overview of what I do from a capital standpoint. So we launched our first fund in 2019, which is a little over $4 million. And the idea is to invest in some of the best scalable tech businesses that are coming out of those rural innovation network communities and other small rural towns. So we invested in 9 businesses out of that first fund. 6 of them were in Corey communities and 3 were outside. We fully invested that money. It was an opportunity zone fund. I think many of you are familiar with that type of vehicle. And then we launched our second fund about 2 years ago, which is a $4.5 million fund, which is just a generalist seed fund. And we're in the middle of deploying that vehicle. And I also wanted to mention one of the other funds we put together last year called the Green Mountain Accelerator Fund. Not relevant for this group in terms of its investment dollars because it was funded by the state of Vermont through a SSBCI initiative. But I think it's an interesting use of those funds. Treasury made it much easier this time around to invest SSBCI dollars in venture stage and growth stage equity businesses. Traditionally, that program was very heavily focused on lending. So I'm excited to see what we can do with the Green Mountain Accelerator Fund in Vermont. It allows us to stretch even earlier. Typically, our main national funds invest in a seed stage. Green Mountain was specifically designed to invest in pre-seed. We have 5 partner communities in Vermont, and they're all trying to put up accelerator programs. So the idea is to be able to provide that really angel stage capital that's often lacking in many smaller communities, because you don't have sort of entrepreneurs who have made a lot of money yet to try to reinvest in those other businesses. So one of the questions was, what do we look for in a company? So I thought I'd just kind of go through merit criteria. The most important piece is the people, the founders, and we are really looking to them to either have an established industry knowledge through their careers or have taken up so much interest in a topic that they've become a real expert in that industry. The reason is that these businesses typically go through a series of pivots as they're growing. So it's really important to understand the industry, how to present the product, and then how to modify that product as the company grows. So that's probably our most important criteria. We'd like to see some type of unique IP or competitive advantage. And specifically, we're investing in tech businesses. That definition is pretty broad for us. So we play across a lot of different verticals. We're looking for some innovation to accelerate change that's happening in the marketplace. And we're looking for a consumer that is either underserved or served at a price point that they would like to see lowered dramatically. And then again, we're trying to create scalable opportunities here. So our primary impact metric is scalable tech job growth. But one of the other impacts we'd like to have over time is creating significant equity wealth within rural communities that can be reinvested in these types of opportunities, and then help that grow exponentially over time. So I thought I'd give a couple examples of companies that we see and founder stories. So this is one we invested in last year. It's a business called Waldo, and it was founded by a gentleman named Leo Huta, who grew up in a logging family in the Upper Peninsula in Michigan. He went off and did some more technologically related work and then came home and really took a fresh look at the way the industry operated, and the way timber is collected and then sent to the mill is extremely low tech. There's basically a form in triplicate in a PVC tube that's tied to timber shipments that kind of travels with it through the process of from landowner to cutter to shipper to mill. And so they have a vision of creating a much larger operating system that could service the entire value chain. But what they started out with was a very clean and simple product, which is basically an app that's like a job ticket for timber. And they've made good progress. They have a pilot in place with Lime Timber, which is one of the largest timber players in the United States, and are able to offer at a reasonable price point that really saves a tremendous amount of labor throughout the value chain. So these sort of triplicate receipts used to have to be able to, you sort of each party collected them at the end of the month and sorted them and entered them manually. It took a lot of time. So with their system, it makes it all automatic. The shipment is tracked in real time, and it just makes it much more efficient. So anyway, I thought it was an interesting example of a industry that might be relevant to your region, where somebody who had some technical knowledge but was not by any means a full technologist was able to create a business and really create an efficiency that I think could have a large amount of scalability in what's a significant industry. One more story I'll share. This is a company we're looking at right now. We have not made an investment in them yet, but I like the story. There is a guy named Patrick Dabercaw who lives in Seward, Nebraska, and about 3 years ago, he took over the head coaching job at Concordia University for the football team. And one of the first things he had to do was replace the coaching headset system that the team had. And he was flabbergasted at the price of these systems. Like the lowest quote he got was $30,000 for this headset system to coordinate the coaching staff, and the highest quote was $60,000. So he got very interested in why this was so expensive, and he thought there must be an app solution for this problem, and there wasn't. So he got together with some of the technical folk at the university, decided to build sort of a simple, elegant app. As a football head coach, he knew exactly what the end customer would want, and they developed this app, and they're sort of off to the races. They're in their first year, but they've got 200 football teams signed up, and at a much more reasonable cost. but still very profitable and it's gross margin for them. And then the rules changed in baseball. So in baseball now, you can have headset communication between the pitcher, catcher, and coach. So they've made a baseball version as well, which makes pitch calling very simple. And they've got about 500 baseball teams signed up. So they're going after other industries as well, where wired headsets are the norm. So hopefully they'll be able to grow that marketplace significantly over time. But even with their sort of initial markets, they're going to make a real business out of this. So I found that those are my slides. Happy to open it up for questions.
Yeah, Jay, thank you for that. I mean, I think you brought up for me anyhow, a really good point about, founders don't have to somehow, be, technologists or super, MBA people or whatever. They just have to have a really deep domain knowledge, and be able to identify a problem and come up with a solution, right? There's creativity and other characteristics, but really the domain knowledge and then, the motivation and kind of, the drive to do it. But I just, like here's a football coach who is not a tech person who's, now developing an app that solves a really problem that he just dealt with every day, so that's where I think, folks even out, I'm also a Humboldt grad, and I spent time out in the forest around Humboldt, and we spent a lot of time out there. And uh funny story is doing some field surveys over many years with a lot of folks at Humboldt, go out and work in the Forest Service. But I can recall in the 90s, early 90s, standing around after dragging measuring tape through like a dense alder thicket up in the Sierras, going, boy, it sure would be nice to have something that could make this a lot easier. And then, today I'm dealing a lot with drones, and I think that's kind of a, good kind of story. You don't have to be in the middle of tech to come up with a compelling kind of at least identified problem and come, think about solutions. So, anyone else have anything they want to say before we, with Jay's presentation? Great to have you all the way from the East Coast joining this. I think it brings another lens to this conversation. So thank you, Jay, for making the time.
Absolutely.
And again, please put your contact information in the chat so folks can reach out to you afterwards. Okay. Danny
Right, well,
Bernstein, The Reservoir.
yeah, I'll take it away. It's really nice to see this group, and I absolutely recognize some faces, Paloma and others. I know that I've had a couple of great follow-up calls after the California Economic Summit, and to get to know your region better. So, as I said, my name's Danny Bernstein. I spent close to 20 years in Silicon Valley, 10 years at Google, and a lot of the why of, how did I go from there to here is when I was at Google, I saw that there was a significant focus on bringing technology to emerging markets. And there were projects that I worked on which were extremely formative for me, like Google for India, Google for Brazil, Google for Indonesia. But there was never a Google for Fresno. There was never a Google for Humboldt. And so what I saw basically is another version of how the Silicon Valley urban areas were very happy to sell technology to rural regions, but we're not necessarily focused on building these regenerative technology ecosystems. And so when I met John and Dan, I think we were, kind of kindred spirits in this respect. Of course, they're very focused on a particular market, which is wonderful, and I can learn a lot from them. And I've had a chance to get to know Corey as well, and Josh Metz has been a mentor really since the very beginning as we kind of think about this. The Reservoir is a brand. Of course, reservoirs are physical, literal things. And there's a lot of talk about reservoirs right now, but it's also it's a metaphor. And the idea is that we leak talent from rural regions. And very often, the best case scenario for a very talented individual from a rural region is find your way to San Francisco, find your way to Silicon Valley. That's a great outcome for you. And so the question is that I was asking myself as we live in a rural region is, what would you have to believe for your kids to want to come back? Or what would you have to believe for there to be the kinds of high road opportunities? And so very similar to the other individuals who spoke today, I started asking similar questions. And before I get into that, I want to share this framework, which is maybe just the only maybe little bit of kind of how to think that I would add on to what Jay, Dan, and John said about sort of how to think about venture. And this is a framework that we've been using to think about where do we get involved and how could we be helpful. And so if you look at the bottom row, which is the technology readiness level, what is the role of venture capital? And the government really plays a huge part in funding R&D through various mechanisms, federal and state level mechanisms. And I see Brian Coleman here from GoBiz, and of course they're deploying capital, which is great. And investors are involved in these stages as well. And what we're looking for is, when we are early stage investors, is are we able to see prototypes? Are we able to see proof of concepts? And can we see that there's a path to potential commercialization? So we may actually invest in a company that may have very little revenue for the first few years, but what they've delivered is a prototype that solves a real problem. And so it's a very different style of investing than investing that's really based on cash flow. It's really we're as venture capital really very often looking at, are we able to get through that tech valley of death and then to start thinking about commercialization? And then when they're thinking about commercialization, the investors get even more involved, and then you start to think about profitability. So I just thought I would share this, and I'll definitely share this framework after. A little bit about who we are. We are a venture capital fund. We also run a nonprofit. So the venture capital side is called Reservoir Ventures. And we took a very broad look at where we thought there were opportunities in rural markets. And we've decided to focus on innovation in specialty crop agriculture. And I'll get into why that is. It's not that we don't think there are other great opportunities like forestry, like ocean-related businesses. It's just that we wanted to be able to start somewhere and prove the model. And I'll talk about what that model actually is. Our nonprofit is also called the Reservoir. So we have Reservoir Co., which is for-profit, or Reservoir Ventures, and then we have the Reservoir, which is our nonprofit incubators. And the one that we're really working on is Reservoir Farms. So we have two core impact commitments. One of them is very similar to the one that Jay talked about, which is that we are trying to deliver a more inclusive workforce. We are trying to back companies that are going to hire and train employees that are local residents from underserved communities many times. And we want to see that those companies are providing equity and profit sharing opportunities. So we ask our portfolio companies to sign an impact commitment. So one side of it is around workforce, and the other side of it is what is the value they're delivering both to customers and to the earth. And so in this case, we have a commitment around precision ag, or you could say it's a commitment around regenerative ag. But that is a very loose definition right now. So what we look for is, are our portfolio companies making technology more accessible to more farmers? And this is the question we're asking. Are they making technology available to more farmers? And that's our kind of technology impact commitment. And you can see kind of some of the other commitments we have. One of the big misnomers about rural is that the markets are small. It is a huge misconception. And there are several major markets that you really think of as rural driven markets. And so very often people say to me, well, Danny, isn't the reason that there's less venture capital, isn't it because these markets are small? And the answer is absolutely not. Ag tech's a big market, bioeconomy is a big market, regenerative ag is a big market, precision ag is a big market. Think about the disaster prevention market. It's a massive opportunity. There's going to be huge amounts of money poured into it. So this is not a market question. And so what we actually have tried to look at is one part of the problem, which is, can we help early stage companies that are focused on rural opportunities be fitter at the beginning? And I'll explain what that means. So if you are a startup based in San Francisco and you are solving a problem for office software, you have dozens of programs that are made for you. You've got these famous ones like Y Combinator, which used to be run by none other than Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI. He used to run the most famous accelerator in the world. You've got ones that there are over 20 startup accelerators in Berkeley alone. And there are a bunch in Palo Alto, there are a bunch in Los Angeles, there are a bunch in San Diego. We actually found that what I actually drove around the state and spent a lot of time, as Josh knows, putting tread on the tires, and could not find a single rural incubator in California that really was recognizable to their urban counterparts. So another way to look at this is that if you are a rural focused startup, there is less support available to you. And some people would say that rural startups have different needs, and this is true also. So there's less support, and there's also different support required. So I'll give you a very specific example here. There are over 7,000 startup incubators worldwide, yet none of them combine two very relevant things for this moment: a working specialty crops farm with a dedicated makerspace for robotics. Those two things do not exist together. And if you think about this moment where we're obviously, labor is a huge question, labor is getting more expensive, farmers are getting more regulated, H2A is becoming a bigger and bigger part of how farm employment's filled out, but H2A is getting more expensive. There is not a startup incubator that is really tuned around this problem. And so this is kind of goes this argument, which is that we think that rural startups receive less support and they also need different support. So we decided to try to test this model with a new type of incubator, which we call Reservoir Farms, which combines our brand, but also this kind of metaphor, which is, what if we could keep more value local? Where I live, which is Monterey County, which is a rural county, is the leafy greens and berries capital of the United States. So what we basically said is, we have this industrial thing that we do in a special way. Can we create a startup ecosystem, a dense startup ecosystem, specifically around leafy greens and berries? And what would you have to believe for Monterey County and Salinas Valley and the Central Coast to have a disproportionate share of innovation as it relates to leafy greens and berries? And if we could do that, there will be this really, really clear after effect, which is that Salinas Valley will go from a place that buys machines today to a place that learns how to operate them, maintain them, fix them, design them, invent them, manufacture them, code them, etc. So how could we help Salinas Valley move up that value chain? Because the higher they move up that value chain, the more value they will capture and the more equity and wealth creation will exist. So we are launching Reservoir Farms this year. We're going to be doing our groundbreaking in Salinas probably next month. I will work with Josh to make sure you're all invited to come to the groundbreaking if you're able to make the schlep down to see it. And then we're working on a second location in the Central Valley. But as Josh knows, we want to do similar kind of inspired incubators around the state and kind of take what we've learned about this very, very, very specific type of startup incubator and try to do it in more places. So I've spoken a lot. I just wanted to kind of give you a preview of our thesis and what we're up to. And again, thank you so much, Josh and team, for inviting us, and happy to answer any questions.
Can I ask a question?
Dan, please.
Go ahead. Something that out of both those presentations that marked me was the need or desire, or how this all occurs in rural communities, is bringing innovation, technology, now certainly in the movement of AI and agent, to existing real world problems. And it requires this broader thinking or changes. And, I saw, Danny, how you were talking about very specifically about how to target with the leafy greens and stuff. And I'm just thinking about how do you think about or approach elevate so the ideas are coming and can start generating, more and more to solve some, real world problems that are scalable and all the other things that we talked about. Because it's one of the things that we've ran into is the the thought process, the ideas, the generation, the really coming in, the energy behind that just for whatever reasons happens in the Silicon Valley and other places.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. So it's actually something we've been studying. Um, so think about it like a grower pain report. The growers in Monterey County, what is their pain report? And sometimes we understand their pains at a very high level, which is labor. It's a very high level. Labor is expensive. Great. But then you have to accordion out that problem into much more specific things. Is it harvest? Is it they don't have enough drivers? Is it not enough maintenance? Is it not enough people who know how to prune a vine? Like, what are we really specifically talking about? And so I think that, and as a rural community, we can invest in these things. We can invest in understanding sort of the rural pain points or the industrial pain points. And I think we can publish those things. So, it's something that we've been thinking about. I have a good example of this, which I can send to Josh, which is there's a project in Fargo, North Dakota called the Grand Farm. And they are focused on different crops like broad crops, et cetera. They're not doing robotics because a lot of that's sort of solved in that world, but they're doing a lot of chemical inputs, biological inputs, regenerative things. And they have this great grower pain point document. It's at the Zoom level that you could, as an entrepreneur, actually pick it up and think, there's something here for me to think about. This is a specific enough problem. And so we want to think about how we can start to publish that for the largest commodities in California, but it doesn't exist. The Strawberry Commission doesn't have it. The lettuce folks don't have it. They don't have that pain point list. So I think you're right, and there's more we can do to make that actionable.
Yeah, I'm just trying to change the thinking and the mentality and to going off and how we can extrapolate what you do to, across our region or other problems.
Yeah, and I think another good kind of foundation here, well represented by what Danny presents here, is sort of building from your strengths. Like the reason that Danny is so focused on specialty crops and berries is because that's what's in the place that he is. And so I know there's been a lot of casting about even in this jobs first thing to come up with like new ideas. But I can tell you from my own experience doing, economic development planning for over a decade now and work showing impacts is you're not gonna create something whole, you're not gonna go into, fine dressmaking necessarily or whatever, something, you're not gonna grow
Yeah, so we're
uh,
not gonna launch like the film industry in
you're
Salinas,
not gonna
or the
launch
next.
the right.
Yeah. So I
And
think that
so
we really have to leverage those strengths, and all of those strengths need innovation now. A lot of it's driven by labor efficiency, but there's other opportunities, bio inputs, et cetera. So
yeah, and so like up on the North Coast, you look around and really, the thing remains, there's a few that remain and it's the forests and it's the ocean and it's kind of the natural resources and stuff like that. Just I know Greg's got his hand up, but I did want to, in that vein, just let folks know there is a whole tech ecosystem around forest stuff, whether it's, utilization of materials and all of that. But then there's this thing I put the link into. It's put out by the Swedish government, and they host this Forest Innovation Summit, which is a tech oriented forest kind of solutions thing. And so I think there's ways that you can, if you can get into that stack like Danny's talked about, or the accordion and get to the details, that's where the entrepreneurship opportunities lie. Fully see that. So, Greg, did you want to?
I will do my best to be brief, Josh. I promise. I hearing some of this discussion, especially about what Danny was just saying, I'm thinking about some of the rural kids, and in particular, my own son. And one of the things that I think is really incumbent upon us is to, especially in the rural areas where we have sort of the direct access to the land or something like that, is to sort of keep that connection to then also the technology. And I think about my son, it's interesting. He's a applied physics graduate of UC Santa Cruz. He lives in Watsonville currently. Um, and when he got to Santa Cruz, he immediately got a job working for the campus, uh, which is a hands-on job because he also can, if you needed him to, milk a goat, or he can harvest and dress a turkey. He can drive a tractor. He can do all those things. And now he has the applied physics grad. But one of the things he noted, and when he got to Santa Cruz, was his dad, and he called me. He said, "Dad, these kids don't know how to do anything." So there's, I think about that in terms of, our resource here, which is kids that can do these kind of things, get their hands dirty, know how to bang on things and are know how those kind of systems work, but also are, I hope, prepared enough to go out and get things like advanced, applied physics degree, which he was showing me what that was about, and I was just smiling and nodding, saying, "Oh yeah, that's neat. I have no idea what that is." But
One thing I'll say, Greg, just in response to that. So this is an area where John and Dan and I have talked about this, which is we're very comfortable bringing entrepreneurs not born in Salinas Valley to the Salinas Valley to
Yeah.
solve huge opportunities. And it's not that we disagree; it's that we just have a slightly different focus. So we're interested in both. And I think that what we often ask ourselves, and I can see Marianne, you're kind of heading in this direction, is like, what would you have to believe for the most capable strawberry and leafy green ag tech entrepreneurs globally to want to lift their company and relocate it to Salinas Valley?
Right.
And I think that is also an interesting question. So to me, I look at both, and that's great where like John and Dan and I can really work together. We can exchange ideas. We're interested in both. And so, I have a meeting on Friday with a Swiss company called Eco Robotics, and they're saying, hey, we need to think about expanding into into these regions, et cetera. So I just wanted to mention that as well, that we also think about it like a corporate site relocation or company relocation motion.
Well, that's great. I mean, I think that happened with us with Emmy buying up Cypress Grove here, and then they bought Redwood Hills down in the southern home in Sonoma County, which have turned into large operate. I mean, they were large anyway, but have benefited obviously from that transfer of knowledge, not only the access to markets. Um, I bring up the point because I think that we in the rural areas tend to not look at sending these kids out to learn some of this other stuff with this base of the practical knowledge and where they can come back and bring it back here. We're terrible at that, right? In some ways. And it's almost the same process in some ways, I think, where you go out and find talent out there that is super knowledgeable, but also practical, right? Um, and and anyway, my head's spinning a bit now, about, okay, so how do we really prep ourselves for that kind of thing? I will say the one last thing, and I was born and raised here, and I think one of our biggest problems is thinking that only the best ideas and knowledge live here, and this sort of fear of the outside, which in some ways is hard earned, but it does constrain us. And so, anyway, I'm excited about this presentation. I'll shut up now, Matt, Josh.
Oh, that's great, Greg. I mean, one thing that I always appreciate about Greg's points is that they're so grounded in this experience that's been lived experience up in Humboldt in particular. And so, I just as a moderator, I get to do my little facial expressions from time to time, but I do appreciate you. You always bring good stuff to the conversation. So thank you. Is there anyone else who's not yet had a chance to say anything that would like to say anything? Oftentimes, what happens with these presentations is people take all of the material, digest it, and then there's follow-up that happens. There are some of us who tend to like to talk, and we always, get involved. So, Lee, do you have anything from your seat there on the Humboldt campus, Cal Poly?
I think Amanda's on her phone too. I don't know if maybe she's still Amanda. There you are. Yeah.
Oh, she's
I appreciate meeting John and Dan, though. I know that we're really interested in this Lost Coast Ventures work, especially as it relates to their relationship with Casey and Sponsored Programs Foundation. Definitely, so appreciate them giving us more information on what they're doing.
Yeah, and we are gonna for our next expert session, we do want to have a focus on the accelerators and the startup kind of ecosystems that exist. So we have one that the West Center manages down in Humboldt. And I know Paloma's working hard on getting her whole story together on that one. And then yeah, the folks who are working with John and Dan up at Humboldt. And I think it'd be great to have one external you know, and maybe we'll see if Danny wants to dive back in on his business model and key assumptions. Is that, you want to do that now, or you want to do
No,
that?
no, no. I'm saying in the future, like if there are and Marianne and Paloma, we've had this sort of but if folks are looking to learn and we can share kind of, hey, here's sort of how we grounded through this, but I'm happy to share our learnings there and yeah.
Good. Yeah, and one thing I'll say, thanks for raising your hand, Amanda. Both Jay and Danny, I think, presented a really good case study in the aspects of the pitch. That is the concise messaging that I think is really important for anybody in this world dealing with this kind of startup. Not to diminish Dan and John, but you guys are kind of coming at it from a different perspective, I would say. But Danny in particular, I've seen him develop all this over time. But just having your talking points and where you're going to communicate it very concisely makes a huge difference in getting people to, I think, get behind your concepts. So anyhow, Amanda.
Yeah, no, thank you, Josh. What a great session, and good to see you again, Danny, and hear from Dan and John for the first time, and other John. I just wanted to say, with the benefit of having now looked through most of the 65 Catalyst pre-development project applications that RISE has received for our meager $9 million of pre-development funding that we have to award. I do know that there's some, a handful of strong industry-led proposals in there that could definitely benefit from the workshopping and the expertise and the kind of the sense and the way of thinking that some of our speakers presented today. So hope we have an opportunity to follow up and perhaps connect folks up with those projects when and if it's appropriate.
Yeah, that sounds great. And it's worth mentioning, Amanda, that, we just went through this in the Central Coast and did receive an award, which we're really excited about. And so it's also something we can share, kind of how we went through that process. We worked with our local community college, so we kind of tucked into their proposal, and that was a great learning, but it's been helpful. So it's going to help expedite our Salinas roadmap. And so hopefully we'll have something to show this group sooner rather than later. So we're showing you pictures and videos versus slides.
Yeah, the reel makes it also is very compelling, a case study of something, a prototype, where you're having that, taking it from idea to, hey, this has been tried and here's what it looks like. Okay, well, quite efficient tonight, and yeah, really great content as expected. Thank you, Jay, for zooming in from across the country, and Dan, John, and Danny. We'll be posting the materials on the working group's webpage and the contact information for everyone, if anyone gets lost and needs to find somebody, you know how to reach us. We can certainly facilitate, as well as our colleagues there in Lee and Amanda's office. So yeah, I think that's what we have tonight. Thanks everybody for making time, and enjoy the rest of your evenings.